beautiful Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful
Guyana will become the next Dubai, and we, the citizens of Guyana, are super excited to benefit from our homeland the same way the citizens of Dubai benefit from theirs.
This is what life is like for citizens from the Emirate of Dubai. When you are born, your parents pay nothing. Your delivery and checkups for the next 9 months are all free. Then you grow up and you go to school. Local school in Dubai is free. And so are universities, because Dubai will pay for you to get a degree.
I studied at Zayed University and New York University, both for free.
Who's going to pay for that?
The government.
Then you get married. If you can't afford the wedding, you get $20,000 to throw a wedding. And after marriage, every local Dubai family gets this: free land. Did you get free land?
Yes.
Did you get free land?
Yes.
Did you get free land?
Sure, yes.
And if you cannot afford the home, then you get a grant to build it for free.
I also can't afford building a house. I can get a zero-interest loan on housing.
Zero?
Zero.
If you need to go to the hospitals are free. And if you need surgery that's not available here, they will fly you to another country to get treatment for free. When you become a senior citizen, you get discounts, many discounts. And if you live alone and can't afford it, Dubai will even send a caretaker to look after you for free. And when you die, well, in Dubai, that's also free. Your funeral will be taken care of, and Dubai will build a full tent with air conditioning within 5 hours of your death next to your home, so your friends can come and say goodbye to you.
Guyana will become the next Dubai.
Guyana, with wonderful people all over this country. She is a beautiful Guyana.
24/7 as we bring our Monday night program to all your viewers. We want to welcome you. Here in New York, it's kind of a cold day. I think Dr. Goolsarran is in Canada. It's cold there as well. And Mr. Ram is in Georgetown, so it's hot. And Dr. Rose and I here in New York. So we want to thank all your viewers for being with us tonight, and to Nohar Singh for making this platform available, and of course to Devin Bissou, our technical specialist. This evening we are discussing the budget, economy, oil revenue, cost of living, and the future direction of Guyana. Quite a bit. We don't know how much we'll cover tonight, but we have two of Guyana's prolific and outstanding sons, both prolific writers, both chartered accountants, held prestigious position in Guyana, as we know. Mr. Goolsarran was the former Auditor General, and of course, Mr. Christopher Ram, one of the great analysts in Guyana, and of course, attorney at law. So gentlemen, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much also.
And of course, with me, my co-host, Dr. Rose. Dr. Rose, welcome.
Thank you, Charles, and welcome, gentlemen, to this program. It will be a great evening to discuss the budget and other issues in Guyana.
Gentlemen, I listened to last Wednesday Globespan program with Ravi Dev and with some of the guests there, and Dr. Blackman had to remind them that they started the program with the tone of the debate. And I know, Mr. Goolsarran, you wrote quite a bit and you're hoping that the tone would not repeat itself when they had a National Resource Fund. But what was your view of the presentation? And was it a debate, or was it that the the government side saying all the glorious things of what the government has done, and the opposition saying all the bad things that nothing good has ever happened. Is this really a debate, or we're just throwing our clothes in the open?
Well, it's a hangover from what we're accustomed to. Both sides of the political divide use the opportunity to degrade each other in different ways. And to my mind, the whole objective of the budget is kind of lost. Because my own feeling is that when you debate a budget, you make proposals for amendment, and if there is merit in justification in making in recommending certain adjustments, one would expect that the government side will at least respect that and accommodate and make. But over the years, once the budget is presented, regardless of the justification that the opposition might raise to have an amendment, it doesn't happen. So the exercise becomes, kind of insulting each other, one attacking and one defending. And at the end of the debate, the 5 days, nothing comes out of the outcome of the debate. The objectives of the debate would not have been achieved. So that's my take on the way the budget, the debate went for the last 5 days. And today we're supposed to have the National Assembly resolving itself to the Committee of Supply to look at the individual ministries and departments, and questions are asked and their responses, and eventually there's a vote. But invariably, whatever the government proposes is carried, And
I know you
are kind of a disappointment for me.
I think you're talking more like Trinidad and Barbados and Jamaica, where the opposition do have an input and the government do listen, but we talk about Guyana here. I know you mentioned in your writing that you hope that the parliamentarian can be independent and speak their conscience, but if they do that, they'll be out of parliament because. So do we have a parliament or we have a talk shop?
Well, that's our problem. That's an inheritance of the past, and we are not changing. I like the American system, the Canadian system, where during the debate, the government side will acknowledge and make accommodations. The only thing I want to talk about, as we are on the topic, there was no consultation with the political opposition when the budget was crafted. And I think that is a major problem. Had there been some consultation, you'd have had a more productive debate, and more, everything would have been based on objectivity and so on. But because the opposition was locked out from the entire budget consultation process, that created the kind of environment for what happened in the last 5 days.
Mr. Ram, you've been a very ardent writer, and you do analysis every year on the budget. When the budget is presented, you give a real nice synopsis so people can, look and see exactly what happened. And of course, there are some in Guyana who think that your analysis is not the best, that they can do better than you. And there's some who think that what they know is that they know everything else, but Christopher Ram doesn't know what he's talking about. So, Mr. Ram, as we look at the 2023 budget, in it, well, before we get into that, what do you think of the debate and what went on in Parliament for the last week, and what is going on today for the rest of this week?
Well, thank you for the invitation, first of all. I always believe someone of Dr. Ashley Singh's caliber does not need to engage and indulge in dirty retail politics. And if you were to look at his very second paragraph, budget 2023 is the fourth budget, blah, blah, after the protracted struggle to ensure the constitutional consequences of December 2018, no conflict, blah, blah, blah. You know, it goes on. And the speech was littered with that type of politicking. There was no place for it. And, yes, the opposition had its own faults, but certainly I would expect a person of Dr. Singh's caliber to be able to address the issues in a far calmer way, and certainly devoid of the kind of cheap politics that was very pervasive. I thought the same thing. And Anand is my friend, but if you notice when Sabakuz reported on Nandalal, who is a very competent lawyer, they said he used the last few minutes to address the matters of his ministry. Why do they need to do this? Is it insecurity? It can't be. So, it's in that atmosphere, it's not particularly encouraging. And when you realize that this budget is merely, in some ways, an exercise in futility, because at the end of the day, the government has already signaled with its, it has one seat majority, and then it incorporated Schumann. It's already made it plain. The budget, for all its faults, with so many billions of dollars thrown behind poorly defined projects, will be passed as presented, and no one can stop it. That's the tragedy we have, and that's the background against which not only this budget but all budgets over the past few years have been presented, and that's sad.
Very sad. And just to follow up with what Mr. Goolsarran wrote on his accountability watch, you're expected to hear, and as you rightly said, Mr. Ram, you want to hear the performance of the country in 2022, which just went by, and its state of affairs and what happened at the end of that year, and what are the proposals for 2023. But as you rightly said, it's really, I don't know why it became so acrimonious in Parliament that both sides want to dig in the other side, and it's really a debate, or is it a rumshop brawl, as some people said?
I don't like the idea that you're trying to create an equivalency here. As I said, where did it begin? And it continued over and over again. When points are made, they're just dismissed. That's not how you have a debate.
Mr. Goolsarran?
Yeah, I agree. As I said, the whole objective of the debate has not been achieved, because one side attacking and the other side defending. And one good thing about it is that the debate did not degenerate to the level that we had experienced in the past. Perhaps they have listened to my advice that they need to conduct themselves properly, and we're watching. So yeah. There was some amount of restraint in terms of the way they conducted themselves.
Well, I don't know if you know, on the very day that the budget was being presented, a judgment was handed down against some of the very people who had misbehaved in the issue of the mace, and they are now facing a few $100,000 each as cost for their conduct, quite abominable conduct on that occasion. So maybe that tempered them a little bit.
But having said that, gentlemen, that has been the history of Guyana's debate. I mean, as far as I can know, because when the coalition was there, it was the same thing. They would have presented their budget, the opposition would make their presentation, they care less about it, and whatever is presented is passed. The only time this was changed was when the AFC was independent in 2011, I believe, to 2015. That period when the budget was really debated and the Committee of Supplies, they made definitive decisions, which in retrospect, gentlemen, the APNU AFC cut the budget for so many areas, and when they became government, they reinstated all of the cut that they didn't give the PPP. So it was really a tit for tat, and it's sad that Guyana continued to go along that road. But gentlemen, Dr. Rose, you want to come in there, and then I'll continue my line of question.
Okay, Mr. Christopher Ram, before I even ask you, I will be remiss if I don't ask you this. At one time, you were recommended to be the chairman of GCOM, and the former president said you were not fit and proper. Can you comment on that, please?
He was probably right. The man has an opinion, and he expressed it.
That's all?
That's all I have to say.
Okay. Now, back to you again, Mr. Ram. The private sector has hailed this budget as being fair. It has everything for everybody. No one has been left out. For every group. Do you think this was a balanced budget?
I had the opportunity to read the budget submission by the Chamber of Commerce, Georgia Chamber of Commerce, by the Guyana Manufacturing Services Association, and by the Private Sector Commission. Less than 5% of what they sought as specific requests, less than 5%, appeared in the budget speech, but they said it was it was visionary and everything. Again, we have such freedom of speech. People are allowed to make even the most outrageous statements and get away with it. When you think of this budget, and I think it's time we go on to that, where is this overarching vision in this budget? What is the guiding principle? We don't have a Ministry of Planning, nothing in terms of planning, and it's spending. And although I've heard it said this is an accountant's budget, well, I'm not sure an accountant would prepare a budget that has $193 billion in deficit outside of a framework dealing with debt, outside of a framework saying, well, look, if you want to spend, who must bear the costs? Are we take that 193 billion there, Dr. Rose? It's either we tax the current generation, or we borrow, or this current generation borrows, kicks the can down the road for somebody in the future to pay it. That's what you have. That's the fantastic budget the private sector was talking about, even though they got less than 5% that they did ask for.
Mr. Goolsarran, you have written extensively about these issues, like Mr. Ram. Can you tell our listeners, what do you think are some of the strengths and weaknesses in this budget?
Well, my own assessment is this is an ordinary budget. It's a kind of minimal budget, I would describe. It's like a top-up of the previous year's budget, and with a generous increase in the capital expenditure. Like 50% of this 781 billion will go into infrastructure development, taking advantage of the oil revenues. Well, I've listed 14 areas in today's articles, and when I look at them, the budget measures, they're all minimal, like salary adjustments to healthcare workers and discipline services. But what about other categories of government workers? such as teachers and civil servants. There was no mention. There was an increase in income tax threshold from 75,000 to 85. I thought perhaps the income tax rate could have been dropped, or plus the corporation tax rate, even VAT, maybe could have been reduced. And I have a difficulty with the cash grants to school children increasing from 25,000 to 35,000.
Why is that? Why is that?
The cash grants, I don't believe in cash grants, and it becomes very selective, and one could argue that there's room for discrimination in that sort of thing. Now, freight charges, they will continue to monitor freight charges to make sure that that those charges are commensurate with the rates prior to COVID. But then the problem with freight charges, they don't reflect in a reduction in the cost of goods and services. Every time you go to the supermarket, why is this thing so expensive? Well, freight charges, transportation. And in as much as the government is adjusting downwards, the tax on the freight, still prices keep going up. And so I have a difficulty with that. Part-time job programs, I'm not a strong believer in that. I thought we need to have a proper institutional arrangements and have full-time programs and have them all institutionalized and reflected in the budget under the various categories. This $5 billion additional cost of living measures to be determined from community engagements. There again, there's room for the exercise of discretion, and when politicians exercise discretion in what's going to happen, I would have preferred to see laid down policies approved by the National Assembly as to how this should happen. Well, old age pension has gone up from 28,000 to 33,000. I don't have much of a problem with that. Public assistance, 14,000 to 16,000. Mortgage low income mortgage ceiling move from 15 to 20 million. That's okay. Removal of VAT on a sale of residential properties, and that's okay for me. I don't have a problem. But then you have these reduction in taxes for the vehicles, electric vehicles, and below 15. But most cars are going into the country. They're above 1,500 cc. So how much will those people who are bringing in cars in excess of 1,500 will benefit? Not much. So I would say on an overall basis, this budget is just an ordinary budget, a top-up budget, and as Chris said, it has no long-term thinking. It's just that you have the oil money, and incidentally, or perhaps it's relevant to say that after 2 years of use of the oil money, that only 260, my calculation, only 262 million remains that it would be carried forward to 2024, something like that. So we use up 100% of the oil revenue at the beginning of 2021, 2022, and then we're using like over $1 million out of the 1.2 billion. So you're left with about 200 million going forward to 2024. So what are the savings for the future generation? That minimal amount going forward. The predecessor to the NRF Act 2021 had provision for a macroeconomic committee to advise on the economically um, a sustainable amount that could be withdrawn from the NRF. Now that has been replaced by legislation codified in a schedule without due consideration of the prevailing conditions. And so the minister will, if for 2022, he took out the maximum, withdrew the maximum from the NRF, and in 2023, he's going to take near to the maximum, just you leaving 206, a little over 200 million US. So my conclusion about this budget is that it is an ordinary budget. It is minimal in terms of what I'm seeing here, and it's like a top-up budget. And the other thing is 50% of the 781 billion will go towards capital expenditure. I'm not sure that the government has the capacity in terms of the skill set in the public service that can deliver on that level of investment, the investment part, public sector investment program. They have been struggling over the years to achieve the targets in the investment program. Like by September every year, only 50% of the funds would have been disbursed, and then there's an acceleration of expenditure in the last quarter, and all sorts of things happen. Like, for example, in December last year, supplementary budget was passed for 44 billion, close to the end of the year. How is that money going to be spent in 15 days? Unless you breach all the rules and regulations. And so those are some of the problems.
Mr. Ram, this budget is the largest in Guyana's history, $781.9 billion. Do you think it will create inflation? And how would it affect the economy? Would it give it a boost or pull it back?
Well, you raise an interesting point there, Dr. Rose. The question of inflation. In 2022, we had the highest rate of inflation for the past 20 years, barring 2005 when we had the flood. Now, there are many people, I included, who have concerns about the figures and inflation. I find it hard to believe that Guyana has recorded low inflation rates in UK, Germany, the United States of America. Not that these people haven't had problem, but I don't believe we have a serious problem with our statistics. When you hear, you talk about, well, Dr. Rose, I don't care about hearing the biggest budget ever. What does it mean? It doesn't mean a lot. Because what happens if oil price goes down 30% next year and not matched by revenues? We would have a problem. Do we start saying, is that such a bad thing that you have a smaller budget? What you want is an efficient budget, a budget that delivers value for money and that meets the overarching goals of the country. It's not the size of the budget that matters. It's about what the outcomes are. And that's one of the problems I find with this budget. And not only this budget, but all the budgets. We keep talking about the budget. The budget is made up of 3 volumes, volumes 1, 2, and 3. I think it's volume 2 that shows what are the outcomes of some of the expenditure. And you have, if you look at that, and I do recommend people to look at volume 2, as well as volume 3. What are some of the outcomes, and do we actually get them? And I would also, Raman McRae has also said, look at the socio-economic statistics. Appendix B, selected socio-economic indicators. For all the money we're spending on health, people still have to turn to the health sector. For all the money we're spending on education, we still, the private sector or a few chosen schools. Now, I am a big believer in public schools. Big believer in public schools. I believe we ought to have a better health service. Now, we are making some progress, but if you look at the socio-economic indicators, you really have to worry. And don't forget, this is not like if it's the first year you're spending all of these billions. Yes, it's the highest of any year. But we've been spending billions and billions on education and health for maybe the last 15 years. And we have to ask ourselves, are we getting value for money? We're spending all this money on contracts, and yet the self-employed. Look, I saw a contract to build a school, 1.75 billion Guyana dollars. I look at the names of the contractors. Of the about 20 of them, just 4 are companies. And yet the self-employed paying less taxes now than they paid a few years ago. Something is wrong. And I really do believe we almost got to reconfigure our budget. If you look at volume 1, you have the capital projects, and you see that our ministry is being given $50 billion for miscellaneous roads. We had a road that wasn't in the budget for Shadnagar just because one road didn't deliver the way we thought it would deliver. Oh, let me build another road. You had the president going to London over the weekend and saying, we will build a stadium. That's not in the budget. Is the budget such a meaningless exercise? Is that what it means? And I really think, I mean, when you see how it's done, the minister speaks for 6 hours. Why doesn't he just speak for 2 hours and let the other ministers speak for themselves? We'll have a much, much better and focused debate. Let's talk about income. The budget doesn't talk about income. This is an estimate of expenditure. And I heard somebody talk, you know, Anand, I differ with you on this one, on the question of tax rate. Corporate tax rate for non-commercial company is actually lower than the personal income tax rate. What kind of craziness is that? And okay, you have transfer payments. And Anand, you would be very familiar with transfer payments. Transfer payments are becoming a most dominant feature. And you know, you handing out politicians going out there, because that's what they said. It's when you go into these communities outreach. Since when politicians are accounting officers? They have absolutely no right to be handling money, let alone donating it to John, Tom, Dick, and Harry, or whatever. That's not how it should operate.
This question is for both of you. I'll start with you, Mr. Goolsarran. Do you think the last government was transparent and accountable? And do you think this government is transparent and accountable?
I think that between 2015 to 2019, just prior to the vote of no confidence that was passed, I think the previous government reflected a greater degree of transparency and accountability. The problem with the previous government had to do with dissolution of the vote of no confidence, dissolution of parliament, delay and attempts at tampering with the election results and so on. But if you look at the Corruption Perception Index during the period 2016 and 2019, or close to 2020, Guyana moved about from 28% to 41%. And it had a lot to do with the reforms that were undertaken during the period 2015 to 2019. Things like amendment to the Anti-Money Laundering Act, the activation of the Procurement Commission, the Integrity Commission, the forensic audits that were done, SOCU's operations, the state asset recovery. So a number of initiatives, anti-corruption initiatives, were taken under the previous government during the period 2016 to 2019. And in my own belief, I feel that the previous government during that period, not after the 2000, they voted, they were far more transparent and accountable.
Mr. Ramu,
You know,
on the same topic.
there are two very defining issues for me that speak to this question of transparency. That oil contract.
Mhm.
Trotman entered into that oil contract and they lied and just were totally dishonest, dissembling facts as they went along. The second one, which was partly understandable, they shut down the Right to Information Act. Now, not that this government is any better. We have not had a single report since the beginning of the act on the right to information, access to information. Not once has anyone been able to get information. I think the APNU AFC realized that the person who was holding position was not delivering results, not contributing to the delivery of results. They went about it the wrong way. They could have changed the legislation. On the other hand, the PPP seems quite comfortable that the person who is there under the legislation that we have as drafted doesn't encourage or promote transparency. I believe the Procurement Commission would have served better transparency and accountability. I believe that whilst we say that the old Natural Resource Fund Act was cumbersome, I think in many ways it was superior to what we have, because you have a situation where the money is being dumped into the consolidated fund. Instead of what I think ought to happen, we should have a separate fund for the spending of money from the Natural Resource Fund. That's what we need to do, but we're not revisiting our financial architecture, despite the significant changes which have taken place in the economy of the country.
Charles?
Gentlemen, as you were talking, I was going through some of the comments, and people who were watching the program, some of them think that both of you are PNC and you're anti-government, and you'll be bashing the government. So that's what I just want to let you know. But Mr. Goolsarran, when you wrote up, before I get into the specific budget, you mentioned program budgeting, and you said it started somewhere in 1998. That would be under President Jagdeo, wouldn't it?
Yes, I agree. But a lot of it had to do with the HIPIC initiative and the need to institute reforms. So they were all like World Bank, IMF conditionalities,
So they were required to do budget by program.
Yeah. As Chris hinted on, or as Chris has suggested, commented on the accountability for outputs, outcomes, and impacts. That is to a large extent lacking. we tend to focus on inputs. So we have the largest budget ever. And every year we keep saying the largest, but we're not looking at the outcomes. We're not looking at whether we are achieving our objectives and whether we are able to get the best value for money. I had suggested there are about 100, close to 200 programs.
184 programs under 80 ministries, departments, regions.
Yeah, and those programs have been there for maybe over a decade, and they keep adding. Instead of taking a hard look at each program and ask the question, are these programs achieving their objectives? And what about the outcomes and the impacts and so on? So I suggested that maybe a comprehensive review should be carried out of all programs and activities. And to the extent that they're not achieving their objectives, you either modify them or you eliminate them. And in this way, we can save quite a lot of money. And
that's a recommendation I think any sane person will make, but you make that recommendation and they think you're anti-government. I don't understand why.
I'm not anti-government. I am anti-bad governance. Let people know that I'm neither PPP, I'm not. Whichever government is in power, if they do wrong things and they don't indulge in good governance practices and they're not transparent and they're not accountable and they're not putting the right people in the right position, then I will comment. And so I am anti-bad governance.
You mentioned performance audit, which is basically like Mr. Ram alluded to that too. He said after 17 years since passing the Audit Act to give the Auditor General the mandate to undertake performance audit, only 12 such audits were undertaken in a selective way as of September 22.
Yeah.
Is there an indictment on our country?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about, accountability for results, performance and value for money, and achieving objectives and so on. Now, the audit has been focusing more on accountability for inputs, almost to the exclusion of outputs. So in 2004, when we passed the Audit Act, the intention was to move in a significant way towards performance auditing and leave the financial audit, which is important also. Maybe we contract as many as possible to chartered accountants in public practice so that the state audit institution would have been focusing on performance. What the state audit should have been doing is to take each program as contained in volume 2 of the estimates and ask the hard question in terms of whether these programs are achieving. And I think I mentioned earlier that under the Hoyt administration earlier, an annual report used to be presented in a National Assembly. Every ministry, department, or region. When I was in the audit office as Deputy Auditor General, I remember preparing an annual report for the audit office, and the Minister of Finance will lay it in the National Assembly. In my column, I extended that arrangement to include a certification from the Auditor General as to whether or not those programs are achieving their objectives. And to my mind, that is the essence of state audit. And not certifying the financial statements, not so much certifying, but certifying performance on a program.
Mr. Ram, sorry, Mr. Goolsarran, you finished? Sorry.
Go ahead, I'm finished, yes.
Okay, Mr. Ram, in addition to what Mr. Ram said about the performance audit, we have what is called the Public Accounts Committee in Parliament. Are they for real in terms of what is this committee doing? Mr. Goolsarran reported that the PAC is 7 years in arrears. The committee is yet to scrutinize the accounts of the wider public sector, including Gaisuco, GPL, Guyana Water, NISIL, and Atlantic Hotels. What's the purpose of PAC? Another talking shop?
Well, it shouldn't be. It has an obvious purpose. And as you know, it's supposed to raise serious issues, and then a Treasury memorandum should be done. Those things don't happen anymore. And you know, the rules have been changed so that we can frustrate the holding of Public Accounts Committee reviews of the Auditor General report. We have a situation where the Auditor General office does not get the kind of resources it needs. If you think about it, now, you know, you can accuse me of saying, look, you're talking about inputs on the one hand, and then you're asking for more inputs. But look at the size of the budget, and look at the increase to the audit office is negligible, absolutely negligible. So it cannot do the work it is set out to do. And in any case, the Public Accounts Committee has been completely politicized. So it's become almost meaningless. There are so many things. Parliament itself is quite a useless organization at times. When you think about it, think how many times it met. Somebody just said to me the other day, well, you know, the Speaker has spent more time outside of the country than he has spent presiding in the National Assembly in 2023. That's a serious comment to make. And so...
Sorry, Mr. Ram, sorry. Devin, Mr. Ram's voice is a bit low. Can you turn it up? Yeah, go on, Mr. Ram.
I hope, Charles, he's not trying to silence me.
Devin?
He wouldn't do that.
Mr. Ram, you'll have to speak up a bit. I'm not sure what happened on your laptop there.
I thought I speak very loud. So no, I was saying that lots of the guardrails for accountability and transparency no longer exist. Parliament doesn't function as it should. The parliamentary sector committees don't. Now look, we have an oil and gas economy now. We've moved from 29% of the budget to 36% of the budget, and that excludes the carbon credit, which would have taken it over 40%. And yet we don't have legislation to deal with these critical areas. We have not had, the only legislation we have had in oil and gas is to change the law to make it easy to take away people's land and to force them to accept a price that is completely unrealistic. That's the only change we've had in legislation. And of course, we've got a PPP introduced a natural resource fund. And as Anand was saying, I may have some issues with some of the numbers. I think there's an NRF account at the back of the budget speech, which suggests that there will be more than $200 million at the end of the year, Anand. But I don't think we're allocating funds correctly. Take public expenditure education as a percentage of national budget, it has dropped significantly between 2018 and 2022. It's in education, and we have a serious problem. You guys, and Charles, you live in North America. You know the effects of COVID on learning, especially in poor communities. We have not addressed that problem. When you listen to the speeches and the ministers, you think, oh God, everything is fantastic. We can build a stadium. We're going to build a stadium in Berbice. We forget in Trinidad got 5 stadiums. The Brian Lara Stadium was overgrown at one time. We can't just spend money because we have it. Yes, we do have. We're blessed. But we're spending money like it's going out of style. Eric Williams once famously said, money is no problem. We must not allow that mindset ever to take over our thinking in Guyana.
Yeah, okay. On a tangent, Mr. Goolsarran did mention the curse, the dot disease, and another thing you mentioned, Mr. Goolsarran, dot disease and something else. Anyway, Mr. Ram, 41% of the projected revenue for this year is coming from the oil and gas, the natural resource fund, and the carbon credit. Now, my point, gentlemen, I went through to the natural resource fund, And I checked it, section 16, talk about withdrawal from the funds. And I want to read that to you guys, and please interpret to me if you don't mind. It says 16.2, all withdrawals from the fund shall be deposited into the consolidated fund and shall be used only, and they use the word only, to finance A, national development priorities, including any initiative aimed at realizing an inclusive green economy, and B, essential projects that are directly related to ameliorating the effects of a major natural disaster. In your professional view, are these current expenditure or capital expenditure?
Anand, you want to go first, or let me go?
Mr. Goolsarran, what do you think?
They're essentially in the nature of capital expenditure.
That is what I thought, but what the finance minister did in the budget presentation, he has put in 2022 the NRF fund on the capital, on the current revenue, to show that there is a surplus, when in fact, if you take out the NRF fund and the carbon credit, there's actually a deficit in the current account with Bank of Guyana. So are we playing games here, Mr. Goolsarran?
No, I don't think we're playing. It's just that they have not addressed the whole issue of how the proceeds from the NRF should be accounted for in the public accounts. And you're right, you mentioned section 16. Essentially what that says, you have to identify the projects that you need to finance out of the oil revenues. And in most cases, those projects would have been related to infrastructure development works, which would have been categorized under capital expenditure. This is why in one of the tables that I presented in today's article, table 1, I showed it neither as capital revenue or current revenue. I showed it separately so that you could look at current revenue, current expenditure, and that reflected deficit of 54 billion in 2022, then capital revenue versus capital expenditure, another 204. Then I deducted the 126,482 to arrive at the overall deficit of 131 million. That figure seemed to be different from what the minister said. The minister quoted a figure of 161 billion deficit. But the point, so you're correct in the sense that the Ministry of Finance has not addressed its mind as to how the withdrawals from the NRF should be accounted for, whether it's capital revenue or current revenue. But looking at section 16 of the Act, it is clear to me that it is essentially capital revenue.
And that's why, Mr. Ram, in 2022, they withdrew 126 billion Guyana dollars, which is like, I think it was 600 million US, or somewhere around that number. Were the projects identified for 2022?
No, sir, and this is where I may...
Mr. Ram, something's wrong with your speaker, sir. I don't know what's going on. I think you're locking yourself out.
Can you hear me at all?
We're hearing you, but very low.
I don't know what to do. No, but I've said before, I think we should have had fund accounting, and I don't believe every capital expenditure should come out of the NRF. I don't believe that. I believe we should have fund accounting, just like how the consolidated fund is made up of the consolidated fund and the contingency fund is a sub-fund. I think we ought to have a special fund and for spending, as 16 said. It's as clear as day, but it's being violated, and I don't agree that because it's a capital expenditure must come out of the NRF.
Well, according to the Act, it says only, as Mr. Goolsarran said, and I think I support that argument, that basically 16.2A and B is saying that all the funds from the NRF should really go towards capital project.
No, but what kind of capital projects?
That is what they have to present in National Assembly, what the projects are. One is to realize a green economy And two, I don't know what this means, ameliorating the effect of a natural disaster. That looks so vague. That sounds so vague.
Well, I think that particular one there, Charles, is because, and Anand referred to this, the NRF sets a formula, 500 million before 100%, the next 500 million, 75%, and it goes on like that. Now, but it does allow, in the case of natural disasters, that you can draw over and above the allocated percentages.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the natural disaster.
Well, in 16.2b speaks of natural disaster. In addition to that, is exactly what you're saying. They can draw even more with another natural disaster. But gentlemen, in 2021, our capital program was $104 billion. In 2022, it was $258 billion. In 2023, the projected capital expenditure is $387.8 billion. Do we have the capacity to utilize this, this sum of money?
Well, it's not about utilizing, it's do we have the capacity to execute programs that are going to be funded with this amount of money? Does the government have the capacity to ensure, again, value for money? And that's really a challenge that the authorities will have to look into. Because I alluded to last year when the 44 billion was approved close to year end, and the difficulty that will entail to execute programs before the close of the year, things like that. So yes, we having the capital expenditure program has increased from 55 billion in 2018 to 258 billion in 2020.
Last year, yeah.
And then it's going up to 388 billion, which is like
50% more than 2022.
Yeah, and looking at 55 billion versus 388 billion, that's maybe what, 6, 7, 8 fold or something like that. Do we really have the capacity to execute? Not to spend. They will spend the money will be spent.
And that's what I'm saying, Mr. Ram, in terms of execution of the policies, of the programs, is it that they're inflating the project costs to give money to the boys? Is that part of this deal?
I can't answer that question because I don't know. What I can say, don't think that only current expenditure you'll have absorptive capacity, only capital expenditure you'll have absorptive capacity for. But in other words, current expenditure, you also need people to execute a current program. You have had your capital expenditure program between actual 2019 and budget 2023 is an increase of 486%. In current expenditure, it's an increase of 71%. We all know, all of us who are employers and not fortunate enough to live outside of Guyana, will know how difficult it is to get quality staff.
Well,
and that must also be true of the government. And if you speak to them, they'll tell you privately that there is that problem. We have, just about anybody who can pick up a hammer or a nail or a wheelbarrow becomes a contractor. And this is why we're getting so much of shoddy work. And you have the Minister of Public Works going and terminating people's terminating contract and blacklisting them, even though he has no authority to do so.
That's true. That's
based on the budget, the proposed revenue is $338 billion outside of the NRF and the carbon credit. But we have $354 billion in current expenditure, of which $145 billion is transfer payment. So basically, that is where the shenanigans go on in transfer payment. And in my opinion, also the capital program, because if prices are inflated and The boys get the money and they share it among whoever need to share it. Is that a fair assessment, gentlemen? Or am I biased?
Well, I don't think you understand clearly what transfer payment is. Transfer payments would also be, transfer payment is payment made for which there is no return in terms of goods and services. Am I not right, Anand?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not just handing out money to people. You have a large part of our thing is pensions. But yes, we have a lot of giveaways. We create slush funds, legal slush funds now. That's same $5 billion. Lots of the ministries got money that really can just be spent. And we have lost control until you come back to the architecture. We have tons and tons of money. There's no doubt about it. The thing is, it doesn't, as Ravi Dev said, even Nani knows how to spend money.
But gentlemen, in the estimate, we will have to borrow almost another billion US dollars. 193 billion in overall deficit. We got to borrow that. That's almost $1 billion US dollars.
Okay.
So we are adding that to our debt.
That's before the next supplementary comes out.
And that's correct, before the next supplementary. So that will go over $1 billion, because supplementary is definitely gonna come out again. I don't know what's going on, guys. But what are the people of Guyana doing to ensure that our treasury, and in fairness to the PP, there's a lot of projects going on, a lot of things happening, but are we getting, again, value for money? Where is the value for money audit? Where are the performance audit? They are not happening. And the question is why, gentlemen? Yeah, Mr. Ram, go on.
As I said, anyone who can afford it generally goes to private medical facilities. In fact, our government has made hospitals tax-free, whilst the workers in the hospitals, in other words, the shareholders in the hospital are tax-free. The workers in the hospital got to pay taxes. But that's a separate issue. So you're spending these monies, and yet whether you're talking about health, you're talking about education, you're talking about security, who depends on calling the police if you have something? Most people, and even just about everyone, takes their own security, and people don't bother to report. The crime statistics that you see in the same social indicator that I'm talking about. That's understated because people don't. What's the point of going to the police to say that your house has been burgled or your cell phone has been snatched from you and you've been the victim of a robbery? So the indicators, we come right back. That and the fact that you have inadequate planning. Just look at the statistics. And we are spending less on health. We are spending less on education. Look at the figures.
Dr. Rose?
Mr. Ram, you said, and Mr. Goolsarran nodded it, that a minister don't have the authority to fire a contractor, even though the contractor is not performing. Who does?
Well, the agency and also the procurement commission and the NPTAP, they can blacklist, but it's not for the minister to do. That's not a function of a minister.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Goolsarran.
It is the head of the budget agency that signs contracts, meaning the permanent secretaries. Ministers are policy-making people. They're not accountable for the financial resources. If you look at the FMA Act, an official, there's some section 85 or something, it refers to an official, a public official, and it excludes, this is about liabilities, and it defines a public official to exclude a minister. We had that difficulty way back when we were talking, when we were looking at the results of before, should the minister be held liable? And then it was the legal opinion is that no, ministers are not accountable for any misuse of public resources. So the permanent secretary is the person who signs contracts and who is accountable to Parliament via the Public Accounts Committee. A minister is not accountable for the financial resources.
So you say the minister who fired his contractor overstepped his boundary or his authority?
That is not his function. That's not his function. The permanent secretary who signs the contract, and based on some report or so, he can terminate the contract.
Okay, thanks.
I wanted to comment on a couple of things as we move on.
Go ahead.
We talk about this massive deficit that we will be incurring 191 billion, and then in 2022 it was 109 billion. Now the financing of this deficit will obviously be by way of overdrafts from the consolidated fund. You know, the Bank of Guyana, the consolidated fund is held at the Bank of Guyana. And prior to 2021, the overdraft was nearly 200 billion. And the government in June 2021 issued the debentures in the sum of $200 billion to liquidate the overdraft. So here is it, you enter into a long-term borrowing for 200 billion to discharge a short-term borrowing of in the form of that overdraft. Now, so the consolidated fund at the beginning of 2022 would have had a positive balance of 12 billion, I think. So if you were to the 109 billion that fiscal deficit, that would have been incurred in 2022 would have resulted in, all things being equal, would have resulted in an overdraft at the end of 22 of about 88 billion. And then when you add the 191 billion, you're talking about back to over 200 billion in overdraft in the consolidated fund. So you clear the overdraft by way of issuing a long-term borrowing debt, and now you incur another 200 billion again. So what is going to happen? Another set of debentures will have to be issued. It will send up the public debt. So one has to factor in that the public debt would have been increased because overdraft, you have to pay back the overdraft. So the public debt that has been reported does not include the 2022 fiscal deficit and the 2021 fiscal deficit and 2022 fiscal deficit, and then now we're going to have, so it's going to go very far again, overdraft, the consolidated fund.
Okay. Mr. Ram, we all know Glendale. He's well off. He don't need to do anything. He could live the best life in Guyana if he wants to. But for the past 2 years, roughly 2 years, he has become the czar, fighting against the oil companies on behalf of the people in Guyana. He's saying that the government has been mortgaging the children and grandchildren's future by giving things away to the oil company, namely ExxonMobil. He's fighting frantically to get the renewal of the oil contract or renegotiated of the oil contract and so forth. Do you think he will succeed?
He's fighting an uphill battle, that's for sure. It's a commendable and a noble effort. Clearly, the government is in bed with the oil companies. It has, look at this carbon credit. It goes to HEST. Now, it's not a test, it's not a potential, but HEST, you're supposed to be regulating HEST. HEST is a supervisor contractor relationship. That has been abandoned. I think this government, and we're seeing it with possibly the gas to shore, the government is allowing the abuse of ring fencing or the absence of ring fencing. But I make the point, Euclid, that you don't need ring fencing in the contract to impose it. All you have to do when they come for a license to a row or one of the new ones, you said, look, you will not use the money generated from that project to explore for some other project. It's as easy as that. This is why, although we have got, and we are getting in 2023, a larger volume of lifts, that's share of oil, a greater number, we are actually getting less percentage-wise because we're allowing the oil companies to do what they want. We have given them a blank check. Every year we should be talking about an audit. Have you heard anything about an audit recently? Of course not. Because we have this relationship with and the oil companies like a government that they could railroad. Despite what Jagan said when in the 1986 Parliament, when we were discussing the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act. I keep referring to that. But just what he warned against we are facing, that we've sold our souls to the oil companies. And as he said to the American oil companies, he had a special thing about the Americans.
Dr. Goolsarran, I've known Glenn Lal, and he's the most determined person I've known, and he will not give up. What advice you will give to him?
Well, he's doing what he is supposed to do, and he's doing what many of us should do, but he obviously he's doing it in a more aggressive way. He owns a newspaper, so he could have a field day talking about it. But I share the concern that the government should make an effort to renegotiate the contract, because there is provision for renegotiation once both parties agree. But we cannot tell ourselves, well, we will not renegotiate. It's a bad contract. 12.5% profits, 12.5% of zero is zero. And 2% royalty, which is perhaps the lowest level of royalty you could ever think of. So let us acknowledge that it's a bad contract that Chapman signed. The new government, the present government, should make every effort to renegotiate. And if Exxon is going to say no, they don't want, then the government of Guyana has other ways and means of forcing Exxon to come to the negotiation table.
Can you say what are some of those means?
Well, approval of approval of extensions, approval of we have the EPA. They have to have the EPA has to sanction certain actions from an environmental perspective, which they're not doing. So the government has various means, because through and legal means to say, well, if you don't agree to renegotiate, we could do A, B, or C. So as I said, I have no difficulty with Glenn Lal championing the cause for renegotiation of what is a bad deal. I said he has his newspaper, he uses it to the maximum, and I would wish others could come on board and express their views.
Mr. Ram, this is a question, and it's a sore point question. The last government built that stadium at Durban Park. It cost over $1 billion. Mr. Ram, it's rotting. On the western side, you find the homeless there sheltering on it. On the eastern side, you find guys taking their girlfriend there as if it's a short time place. What is happening to us in Guyana with all that money? This government has no intention of using that stadium. That's how we just throw money away.
Well, I'm not sure what a short-time place is, but I'll answer the other part of the question.
Well,
that was, and you don't need to go into it. That's fine.
I know.
No, that was mindless. It was brainless. It was irresponsible. There's no question about it. Absolutely irresponsible. It's an eyesore, and the quicker we take that thing down, the better it's going to be for the aesthetics of that area.
Mr. Goolsarran?
Yeah, I agree that that was one of the biggest blunders that the previous administration made in their initial anxiety when they got into the government to put up that structure, which is wooden. Obviously, it was never meant to last for any good period of time. But at the same time, I would say that the present government should do something about it. Maybe take it for what it was, when the previous government left, and see if they could have done something for the benefit of the community in that area. I think essentially that the intention was, I don't know, maybe to benefit the community, but they have approached it not in the correct way by creating wooden structures. And I guess they wanted to create the equivalent of the national park that, within that thing we have in the national park, which is now not being used. That park and the facility they were built under the Burnham era, and it was used for national events and so on. So now in 2015, the APNU decided to do the equivalent of that, but in the process, they really messed up, and the present government should have taken action to develop it into a more permanent structure, and as Chris said, make it more aesthetic and what have you. It would have benefited the community at large in that area.
You know what?
It's a nice area. When I pass, it's a nice area, and that could have been developed into an area of relaxation. I always looked at that area from Bessinia Road going to the back road. We could have had maybe 24 cricket grounds. At that time, I was thinking like that. But it's left to rot, and so it's a disappointment, waste of money, and it's left there to rot, and I don't know, what can we do?
You know what I don't understand from our politicians? They traveled to the Caribbean. I'm using the Caribbean. They can go to Trinidad and see Trinidad got a place called Independence Square, where the Union Jack was lowered and the Trinidad black flag rose the same night. And with the year of independence, 2 poles up in the air, shining lights in the sky with the year of independence and so forth. Jamaica call it Independence Park. Barbados call it again Independence Park, and the small islands call. Every country in the Caribbean got something where the Union Jack was lowered. Burnham got a national park where the Union Jack was lowered. If the governments after come in and say, well, we're going to expand national park, set up something where people can say, well, this is our Independence Square or Independence Park, none of them did it. Granger could have gone and done that if the PP did not do it. Expand Durban Park, make it Independence Square, Independence Park. Do like the rest of the Caribbean islands. Get 2 poles in the air with light shining on top, drape our flags across the 2 poles, and the year of our independence. Nothing whatsoever. So what I'm saying, one government builds, the other comes in and destroys. The other one builds, the other comes in and destroys. How are we going to develop? But that's a different question. Mr. Ram, do you think we're getting enough oil revenue from the oil companies, namely ExxonMobil?
Well, I already said to you that if you look, our percentage has actually fallen over the past 3 years. I would say that answers. In fact, it's less than what it ought. It certainly is less even than what it ought to be, which is within a bad contract. We should be getting far, far more.
What should be done for us to get more?
Well, government has said, and look, Budget Focus pointed out in Ecuador, Ecuador president said last year, we will have to try to get as the last drop of oil. That's the thinking of the PPP. Now, it's a matter of policy, and if that's what they said, but having decided that, surely they should say, well, okay, how do we maximize it? Not by allowing Exxon and them to cheat us. They've already cheated us with pre-contract costs. There's no question about it. I've accused them on that score. They've never been able to respond. Their own audited financial statements condemn them. We are allowing them to claim expenses that really ought not to be there. And you know, Prime Minister Rowley said the other day, he said, look, you know, we fought the oil companies and made sure that they came back to the table. This government is not so inclined, and so we are suffering for it. The fact that we do have a lot of oil per capita, we are right up there. We got to be mindful that we don't squander it, and we don't allow ourselves through bad governance, lack of accountability and transparency. We don't allow ourselves to suffer from the resource curse.
The world is moving away from this type of energy resources, because you have a number of electric cars. Europe, I think, is half of Europe already gone electric cars. And vehicles are the major use of oil. So I have to support the government in getting the oil out of the ground as fast as possible. We can't wait. But in doing so, what do you think they should do to make sure that we receive our fair share, Mr. Goolsarran?
Well, I talk about renegotiation. Look, in 2021, we received 126 billion, which is like a little over 600 million US. And then the minister reported at the beginning of 2022, the balance on the NRF is 1.271 billion, which means that in 2 years we would have received 1.8 billion US dollars, which compared with what Exxon is receiving, that's like Exxon is receiving 87% or 86%, 85.5%, and we are receiving 12.5 plus 2, 14.5%. This is minuscule compared to what Exxon is getting. So we are not getting a fair deal. We need to renegotiate. And Chris, the balance, when you take all of that, and the minister said that the equivalent of $1 billion would be withdrawn from the NRF, we are left with 269 million only to carry forward to future generation. Now remember, sovereign wealth funds. The purpose of sovereign is to one of the reasons to have sovereign wealth fund is to put aside an adequate amount for future generation, because the natural resources of a country belong to the present generation, future generation. Now, we are at the end of 2023, we will be left with 269 million to go forward to future. So we're not getting enough. And if you were to look at our budget as 781 billion and what we're getting as oil revenue, how much of that, what percentage of the oil revenue compared to the budget is not that much. So my argument is we badly need to renegotiate to make sure that we get a better share of the revenue, not for this generation, but also future generation.
ExxonMobil went into over 30 countries, and many reports I've read, Exxon left those countries worse off than when they went in. Now, we are saying that Guyana will become the Dubai of South America. Mr. Ram, are we going to be worse off with Exxon when they leave, or we become the Dubai of South America?
I don't think either one will happen. you have to understand the characteristics of Dubai. And you also,
Mr. Ram, you're still very low. I don't know why your voice is so low.
I really apologize. No, I was saying it's neither. We will not become the Dubai because of the sheer characteristics and the ownership of the facilities. Don't forget, the law says the oil belongs to the people of Guyana, but we have given out, not contracted out. We've given out and given away a large part of it. So you get a situation where of 69 lifts in 2021, we got 9 out of 69. In 2022, we get 13 out of 102, and in 2020, 17 out of 136. We're actually getting less as a percentage, and this includes the 2% royalty. So we already start with a positive, and yet something is going on, and I don't know. Maybe there's a different kind of accounting practiced by these oil companies than what we would know as accounting from our school days, as we were talking about earlier.
Both of you, do you think the country is heading in the right direction? Given the budget, given ExxonMobil, given the revenues we're receiving?
Chris first.
You, Mr. Ram.
I think certainly we can do so much better. The political culture and temperature are toxic, and we can do better. We don't behave as though we have a highly divided and evenly divided and a highly polarized society. You can't just pretend that half your population, half your voters don't exist, simply because you're in a position to take money and hand it out to people. So our constitutional arrangement, our winner-take-all politics, don't get us anywhere. We talk about constitutional reform. Well, let's see what will happen. We still have we have the highest growth and the lowest national minimum wage. Think of the paradox. They don't sit very well. So in terms of whether we're going in the right direction, it depends on how you define that direction. Certainly, I believe that we need to close that wealth gap, not just by handouts, but by making jobs, creating jobs and better paying jobs. And so that people don't have to depend on this special employment arrangement and special school arrangement and all these things. They should ought to be able to earn a good salary and enjoy a good living.
Mr. Goolsarran?
You asked a very important question, whether the government is going in the right direction. That's a difficult one to answer, but what I can say is there's a lot more that needs to be done. And Chris mentioned some of them. The governance aspect is badly lacking. Governance, accountability, transparency, fairness, equity, putting the right people in the right position, put aside loyalty and appoint people based on technical and professional training. And that, if all of that happens, then the country is going to embark on the right road. At the moment, I don't think, if you don't address those issues, and then of course we have the problem with politics based on ethnic consideration. That's a big one too. So these are issues that we need to address and address urgently if the country is going to move forward. I'm not certain. I don't believe that we will move close to us, what is happening in Dubai, but certainly we can reach a middle ground between Dubai and what we have at the moment. But address those issues: governance, accountability, transparency, fairness, equity, treat everybody equally. We have to address, we cannot bury our heads in the sand and say there isn't an ethnic problem. We got to correct that. And the only way to correct that is to have meaningful consultation, extremely meaningful consultation with the two blocks, so that whoever is in the opposition, they can still embrace, because you've consulted with them and you have taken into account and you have taken into consideration their views. And then we can work together as a group. At the moment, we are divided, and a house divided cannot stand. So there is no Dubai in the horizon.
Charles?
And gentlemen, you're right. But again, Mr. Goolsarran, Mr. Ram, when the opposition is saying that it's an installed government, they're not recognizing the government, who this government will negotiate with as well. So we have those issues as well to address. And I'm glad you guys mentioned the, we following the North American or the established traditional approach to macroeconomic, and we're talking about GDP. But in North America, in Europe, most of the production in those countries, the revenue stays in their country. In Guyana, we talk about this huge GDP, but what percent of the revenue stays in Guyana? So, and Mr. Ram did the right thing. We talk about this big GDP, and we have the poorest, employment costs in terms of salaries and wages. Next door to Grenada, that depend on nutmeg, and Mr. Ram works there. Their salary is higher than ours. They don't have oil like us, but so we are measuring things. We have this big, huge development. GDP is so big, and our salary is the poorest in the Caribbean. But gentlemen, we've run out of time. It's been a great discussion. But in closing, we want to say a couple of things. One thing is that, as Dr. Rose mentioned, the history of Exxon, as you mentioned, we all know, that the first thing they do is they fill the pockets of the politicians. So if they fill the pocket of politicians, who will speak for the people's behalf? Because they already compromised. And then the second thing they do, we are told that they make some businessmen in the country very rich. So they are quiet as well. And the third thing they do, they divide the people even more. And I'm sure the Exxon, they play this game all over the world, and we seem to be the pawns of that, and we are not understanding the game of Exxon is playing with us. But I think, as Glenn Lal rightly said, the people in Guyana is thinking of, who they with who wife, and who they with who husband, and who is cheating on this one, and who is doing that, and young and the restless, and all these crazy things they're looking at. And the future of our country is being stolen away by the foreigners, and the Guyanese people is still sitting in our, our laurels, so to speak. Gentlemen, we want to thank you so much again for being in the program. In closing, Mr. Ram, you got to come closer to the speaker, because we want to hear you in closing. Anything in closing?
Well, I just want to say thank you again. I don't believe the budget will achieve the inflation target 7% or something. That's unrealistic. I think we will end up with a bigger deficit. I think we're going to have a lot of wastage, corruption. I believe tomorrow the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index will be coming out. That's going to be interesting. And so we really need to fix our politics and our governance situation. And if we can do that, it will be a marvel indeed.
And Mr. Goolsarran mentioned that the government have a lot of things for which to demand some change, but the EPA, we know, is a poodle of the government. Whatever the government say, jump, and they say how high, they're not independent based on what we have seen in the last year or two. So in closing, Mr. Goolsarran, any comment?
Well, let me thank you for having me on the program. I think we have covered quite a lot of ground, and I'm not happy with the direction in which the government is going, and I mentioned a few things that we need to take into account. And once we can address those issues, I think with the little oil revenue that we are receiving, the pittance, you keep using the word pittance. If we use the revenue wisely and we manage the economy efficiently and effectively, and we cut out waste and extravagance, I think Guyana still has a future. And as I said, that future isn't far away from what, if we are thinking about Dubai, but certainly a middle ground between where we are and where Dubai is achievable if we take certain actions. And as
Thank you. Dr. Rose, anything in closing?
Yes, I will continue to call for an increase in the retirement age from 55 to 62. I will also call for an increase in wages for teachers and public servants, similar to what the nurses are receiving. Also call for better internet services. And one thing I will say to compliment the Minister of Education, she's doing a fantastic job in expanding the education system across the country so that no one will be left out from being educated. That's one thing I noticed in the education department. Our team, she has a team that is working to expand education. So with that said, I think that the government of itself has got to make sure that everyone in Guyana receives a proper education, because that's the way out of poverty and not imprisonment. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, our audience, for staying with us. Thank you, Nohar Singh, and to Devin, and to all of Guyana. God bless our great country. And we hope that tonight's discussion will hopefully reach the ears of our politicians, and hopefully we can transform our country into a brighter and more prosperous future. Thank you, and God bless Guyana.